SCP-9100 Daydream Part 2. There's an anomaly coming out of Ohio, and I'm not going to try to include some sort of meme reference here. It's some sort of mental parasite that causes people to become utterly average and boring in every way, until a massive trauma causes them to wake up, realizing how many years of their life they just missed. It's been assigned to the Minor Anomalies Unit, and Doctors Finley and Vo have been hard at work trying to solve it, despite the meddling of Site Director Talbot. Now, it seems Finley has become infected with it too, which is definitely going to complicate things. Let's take a look. We pick things up with a voice memo from Finley, in which he discusses the transfer offer that Vo got to the Parapsych Division. He told her to take it, and not to waste her life kicking about with them, as she deserves better. But she turned it down, said they were doing the real work here, or some such. Maybe he could have pushed more, but he didn't want to rock the boat too much. It is what it is. 2 months later, Vo signed an emergency breach requisition to begin regular PSG screening for research personnel assigned to Daydream. At the first such scan, Finley was found to be affected. In accordance with protocol, Vo immediately hit the panic button, initiating a site-wide lockdown lasting 3 hours. A comprehensive headcount was taken, and all Site-86 staff were scanned with PSG imaging to determine the scale of the containment breach. Off-site staff were also located and isolated by security teams until a PSG scan could be completed. Dr. Bakaluba and 3 other junior staff members were also found to be affected, but no off-site staff were contaminated. As a subject of special interest, Finley was designated SCP-9100-B. Decontamination efforts were initiated. 2 of the affected staff members spontaneously self-decontaminated between their initial detection and a follow-up scan 24 hours later, likely owing to the stress of sudden containment and awareness of procedure NAPIG. By contrast, a member of security staff reported that Finley had an unusually reserved response to the news that he was contaminated, remarking that it was bound to happen sooner or later. Due to the urgency of prompt decontamination, Talbot ordered that decontamination of newly discovered instances begin at Stage 4, starting with Bakaluba. Vo failed to execute this order, citing a fault with the electrical components of the necessary apparatus. She instead started Bakaluba at Stage 1 and successfully decontaminated him 1 hour later at Stage 3. Afterwards, she remained in the chamber with him for 2 hours, far in excess of the recovery period stipulated by the protocols. A subsequent service inspection was unable to locate any fault with the electrical component. A couple of days later, citing inefficiencies related to the decontamination of Bakaluba, Talbot amended NAPIG to stipulate that procedures should be performed by security staff instead. As a result, Vo had no involvement with decontamination procedures for Finley. Finley started at Stage 1, but after 3 hours, had failed to decontaminate across the first 5 stages. A request for Stage 6 decontamination was sent to the O4 Council. A month later, Bakaluba requested a transfer from Site-86, which was approved by Talbot. Vo was named head of research for Site-86. Later, a breach report issued by Talbot identified Finley as the likely source of the containment breach for SCP-9100, under the assumption that he had accidentally made eye contact with a contaminated instance at some point. Yes, the Foundation, famous for just assuming things. Vo wrote a message to Talbot stating that, with respect, she doesn't believe Finley would make such a simple mistake as looking one of them in the eye. This theory also doesn't account for the contamination of the other 4 staff members. If they assume Finley was infected 6 months ago, that's significantly short of the observed gestation period. She kindly requests that he reevaluate the findings published in the containment breach report. She never got a reply. 2 months later, another survey of civilians in the Akron metropolitan area and other neighboring cities was performed to reassess the prevalence of SCP-9100 in the civilian population. PSG cameras were covertly installed in optometry and dental clinics, nail and hair salons, and where possible, the rear walls of restroom cubicles. The quantity and quality of images captured increased drastically, and the total number of extant instances detected was 15,021. The majority were in Akron, followed by Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Contamination was correlated with loneliness, chronic disease, addiction, and unemployment. A month later, a memorandum was sent out to Site-86 personnel, stating that in light of Finley's 12 years of satisfactory service to the Foundation, his continued, albeit average, proficiency in cognitive and behavioral test scores, and the impracticality of decontaminating him, he has accepted the offer of reinstatement to active duty, with the title Lab Technician. He consents to being medically blinded in order to prevent further viral spread of SCP-9100, and will be provided whatever accessibility considerations are needed to perform in his new role. His performance is to be monitored and reviewed on a quarterly basis, acting as the first trial of Project Daydream. Neutralization of unplanned transmission remains the primary research focus. Based on what we know about 9100, I'm not sure if a contaminated individual can really consent to anything in the traditional sense. 2 days before the procedure to medically blind him, Vaux submitted a study for review, with the objective being to identify the source of Finley's contamination. It involved a comprehensive review of over 100 hours of security footage, cross-referenced with Finley's performance metrics, badge in-out time, and cafeteria purchases to determine the precise moment such statistics became average. Her analysis indicated that the apparent moment of containment breach was when Finley heard a contaminated instance speak the phrase, "We needed this rain." In light of this report, the blinding procedure was cancelled, and pending a more effective way to limit transmission, Finley's reassignment to lab technician was cancelled. A subsequent review identified that the 4 staff members had each been contaminated by a different infected instance. All 4 used different phrases. "It is what it is." "You know how it goes." "Here today, gone tomorrow." And "That's the way the cookie crumbles." All of the containment breaches occurred within the Euclid containment facilities, as the Keter-class containment facilities are soundproofed by default. 3 weeks later, another experiment was performed to identify the trigger phrase transmission vectors and constraints. Subjects begin to use trigger phrases in speech almost immediately after infection, but these utterances do not transmit SCP-9100. The frequency of trigger phrase usage increases drastically once the gestation period is complete. At this stage, the trigger phrase will transmit the infection to any nearby inattentive individual that hears it. After infecting one other individual, subject's gestation period is presumed to begin again. Written communications by infected individuals also feature the same trigger phrases, but they do not spread the infection. The identified phrases are phatic expressions. They convey little semantic value, but serve a purpose in building social bonds, especially in small talk between strangers or loose acquaintances. An emergency meeting of the O4 Council was held, centering on the Council's concerns that Finley's resistance to decontamination was due to his long tenure at the Foundation, which had rendered him highly tolerant to psychological stress. As these qualities were shared by all of the Foundation's senior leadership, the ongoing failure to decontaminate Finley indicated that 9100 posed a critical risk to senior management. The Council demanded that a suitable method of decontamination be found for Finley as the highest priority. The request for Stage 6 and 7 decontamination for Finley was denied by the O4 Council. Talbot received a private memo by the O4 Council explaining the reason for this denial, but Talbot was unable to furnish this document to the A12 audit, claiming it had been lost due to clerical error. Pretty sure the reason is that they don't want to find out that the only cure for them would be horrific, unimaginable torture. A couple of days later, an interdepartmental request for proposals was issued to garner input on potential decontamination approaches within NPEAG stages 1 to 5 for veteran Foundation personnel. We then get a voice memo from Vo, in which she says that she's trying these voice memos out, as Finley said they helped him think. Everything about this is weird. Today they were moving his effects to long-term storage, and she took his personal hard drive. So now she has thousands of memos from decades of work. He should have saved them to the central database, but of course he didn't. It'd take her years to sort and file them all, and she hasn't had time to listen to any yet. He used to burst into the room, clap his hands, and say "right" in his big, booming voice. You could tell he loved making everybody jump, even though he never cracked a smile. She's sitting in his lab now, and she supposes she's still waiting for him to slap open the doors, clap his hands, and tell her what to do. Knowing that he's not dead, that he's sitting in a cell just down the hall, somehow only makes it worse. Talbot set up another transfer offer to Parapsych, a second chance to say yes. She's not so naive, as she knows he wants her out of the way, but she's the best qualified to manage 9100. Besides, Revel will start soon. It's what Finley and her fought for all these years, to get out there and actually cure people. It won't be pleasant, applying NPEAG methodologies to civilians, but they'll do what they have to. It'll be good to be in the field again, as she needs to get out of this lab. A week later, decontamination efforts on Finley were halted due to lack of success. Project Daydream was placed on indefinite hiatus until such time as Finley could be successfully decontaminated. The budget allocated to Daydream was frozen, and the in-progress Operation Revel was also halted due to lack of funds. 156 civilians were successfully decontaminated before funding was exhausted, with 12 individuals found to be resistant to NPEAG, establishing that Finley isn't unique. Resistant individuals all had isolated lifestyles with few social connections and various comorbid mental illnesses. During decontamination procedures, they become less responsive over time, in contrast to the awakening typically observed. The resistant individuals were assigned periodic surveillance, but were not contained due to lack of funding. A couple of weeks later, Vo interviewed Finley in order to utilize his experience to identify optimal research direction. As she enters, she freezes in apparent surprise, as Finley is lying on the bed, recovering from injuries sustained during decontamination. She takes a seat in the corner and begins to write in her notebook, not looking up as she speaks. Finley interrupts her to comment on her title of Head of Research, remarking that that's a turn-up. She asks him if he's aware that he's still contaminated by SCP-9100. He replies that that's been made readily apparent, but what can you do? It's bound to happen sooner or later, as in their business you retire, you die, or you get an SCP label. Sometimes all three. It is what it is. Vo asks him why he thinks the decontamination procedures have been ineffective. He just says that it wasn't for lack of trying, but he doesn't know. He supposes that's for her to solve now. He thought she'd be the one testing positive, but them's the breaks. Then again, she's always looking in that notebook, so not much risk of eye contact there. He's impressed, though, and proud of her for keeping things professional. She had some wobbles at the start. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. But now she's grown up. Vo stops writing, but doesn't look up, as she says that she's been offered a transfer again to parapsychology. Finley just says about time, but she says that if she takes it, she won't be back here for a long time. Finley shakes his head and says that that sounds grand. It's what she's been working for. He tells her to go help the people that need it, and asks what possible reason would she have for staying in this dump. A minute passes in silence before Vo stands, and she thanks him. Finley nods and says that if she needs him, she knows where he'll be. He lies back down on the bed, and Vo leaves the chamber. Afterwards, Vo recorded another voice memo, stating that she scanned herself immediately and she's clean. She's not sure if she was more afraid of being contaminated or what they'd do to her if she was. Avoiding eye contact was easy, but maintaining attention was not. She tried mental arithmetic, but it was just another kind of distraction. She settled on counting his syllables. Every time he used a trigger phrase, it was like an assault. She could feel him trying to pull her down, drag her under the waves, and she barely made it out. Why did she take a risk like that? Why is she still here at all? He was right. She's grown attached to this case, and she's not thinking clearly. She was so excited when she first came here. After everything with her mom and dad, she thought the Foundation were superheroes. She wanted to be one too, swooping in to rescue people from nightmares. She wants to feel that again. 3 days later, Vo accepted a transfer to Site 20, joining the Parapsychology Division as a principal researcher. 7 years go by, during which no progress was made on SCP-9100. She maintained a written correspondence with Finley, exchanging letters around once a month. The content of these 71 letters exclusively concerned various unrelated research projects. Vo's stated purpose for this correspondence was to access and utilize the decades of research experience that Finley still possessed. In November of 2025, Vo sends a message to Toad Carey, stating that she still hasn't received a reply from Finley to her November 21st letter. He's always replied exactly 34 hours and 18 minutes after receiving hers. She asks if there has been a development in his situation. Carey replies that there has been, and attaches a staff memo to the Site-86 staff from Harry Talbot. He writes that given that infected instances of 9100 pose a low risk to the public, he has issued direction that SCP-9100 will no longer be actively contained. Research activities will shift to long-term monitoring of SCP-9100 prevalence in the civilian population. The remaining contained instances, along with Finley, will be amnesticized and returned to the general population. In light of his contributions to the Foundation, Finley will be offered the full retirement plan following amnesticization. Vo records a voice memo, stating that this came out of nowhere, and Talbot loves Saturday surprises. It's been a long time since she thought about this case, and she supposes she'd accepted that they'd never get an answer. Looking back at her memos, it's hard to say where the last 7 years went. They've been busy here, and she fell into some kind of routine. His letters were like a clock, steady, dependable, but forgettable. She knows how that sounds, but she has an EMP-SG camera in her office, and she steps in front of it every week. She's always clean. Even so, this memo was a wake-up call. She tried to forget and get back to work, but she can't. Everything at Site 20 feels irrelevant. If they send Finley back and amnesticize him, he's gone. They'd lose decades of knowledge and experience. Not to mention, it's the best case of treatment-resistant contamination they've seen. He's key to solving that problem. She needs to act. She has to speak Talbot's language, do something Finley never could, never would have done. She sends a message to Talbot stating that she can solve SCP-9100 if he'll give her the resources. Daydream was their shared vision. He can't give up on it now. If they send them back, it's over. 10 years of work just to concede defeat. But if they can truly understand what this entity is, and find a way to decontaminate Finley, they can finish what they started, and Talbot will finally get the recognition he deserves. All she asks is that he retain the subjects, accept her transfer back to Site-86, and let her run this. Talbot replies that it's good to hear from her, and he's pleased that she hasn't lost her passion for Daydream. He'd be a fool not to question, though, whether this request is motivated by the project or her residual loyalty to Finley. He was a difficult man. He saw personal slights where there were none. He nurtured some personal vendetta against him, likely from their past in Dover, and he was blind to the ways Talbot tried to help him. As a case in point, he assigned Finley her, the brightest and best resource he could spare at the time. Perhaps she can understand what Finley couldn't, that Daydream was never about recognition, it was about finance. He needed something to offset the exorbitant expenses Finley was always happy to accrue. The head of research role at Site-86 is currently filled, but she's welcome to rejoin as a senior researcher. Given her stated enthusiasm for Daydream, he expects that she'll lead the pitch when they sell the project to the O4 Council to make them understand the value of their shared vision. He'll postpone the transfer, but he needs those subjects off the books before fiscal year 2026, so she has 1 month. And whatever happens, SCP-9100 stays at Site-86. 4 days later, Vo rejoined Site-86 as a senior researcher. Talbot reallocated Site-86 funds for SCP-9100 research, and Finley, along with 2 other instances, were retained for study. Talbot arranged for Vo to lead a tour of Site-86 for 059, along with their retinue of security and administrative staff and several members of the O4 Council, with the goal of renewing interest in Daydream. Vo ordered that Finley and the other 2 instances be comprehensively retested for performance during this tour, in order to demonstrate the consistent nature of the anomaly and highlight its potential utility. The performance of all 3 individuals was found to be 18% higher on average than their previous test 6 months ago. This is the first significant change to these scores in 9 years, and while their performance was still anomalously consistent, it's at a new higher baseline. They set about to determine if the presence of senior leadership affected the previous test, and retested them the next day in the absence of senior leadership. Their performance scores returned to their previous baseline. The revised hypothesis is that their performance matches the average of the local population, not the global average. Introducing high-performing staff members to Site-86 raised the local average significantly enough to be measurable. Therefore, some connection exists between SCP-9100 and the minds of uncontaminated humans. A new experiment was performed to determine if information can travel between infected instances through anomalous means, like telepathy. The subjects were isolated for a week, during which all Site-86 staff were instructed to use the phrase, "kangaroos can't dance," as frequently as possible. To ensure participation, Vo informed staff that their compliance would be monitored, and that a $50 lunch voucher would be offered to whomever used it most often. At the conclusion of the experiment, an employee was selected at random to receive the prize. I can only imagine the collective head shakes when that memo went out. Finley and another instance were then put into a chamber together and allowed to converse freely. Both subjects used the phrase, "kangaroos can't dance," during the conversation. Whereas the other subject used it to express commiseration, Finley used it as an exclamation of surprise. Neither remarked on this discrepancy. Vo writes that the subject's speech is influenced by the local population, just as their performance appears to be. They're telepathically linked. Telepathy requires extremely high Mensimi scores, an intense level of consciousness, but their scores are extremely low. As an aside, she analyzed Finley's speech patterns before and after contamination, and she noticed a substantial reduction in the use of Scottish phrases, which backs this theory. She wonders how she missed that. Talbot sent a message to Vo telling her that leadership was intrigued by what they saw during the visit. He confesses that the difference in performance metrics was a concern at first, as he dislikes surprises, especially with leadership on site. Her latest test reports are compelling, though. If they can manipulate the local average by introducing high-performing team members to a group of Daydream subjects, they'll have a way of increasing productivity, not just standardizing it. When he relayed this to the leadership team yesterday, they were very excited. The question was raised once again, however, of how soon before they have a method of decontamination for Finley. There will be no Daydream, and no funding without an answer to that question. Time is running out. A few days later, Vo sends another message to Toad Carey, stating that she got the attachments of the various scans, but she specifically asked for an Eckhart-Mendel PSG. She refuses to believe that no one in this entire organization has ever imaged a telepath with a paraspectrogram. Carey replies that he was told by the sources she recommended that telepathy shows up blank on a paraspectrograph. Vo replies that she's aware. That's why she specifically asked for the Eckhart-Mendel method. If no one's done it before, have them stick a telepath in one and send her the results. Talbot's pain. Site 49 is the nearest site with a resident telepath. Ask them. 4 days later, Carey replies, telling her that Site 49 is taking a long time to reply. He had to ask them 3 times, but they did run the test themselves. He sends the scans over, of the telepath and of Finley, which largely match. In a voice memo, Vo says that it's as she suspected. This kills the ghost theory, finally. A human spectral imprint overlaid on a conscious mind. What they were seeing was an active telepathic link. She dug through the archives for cases of low Mensimi telepathy and found a case from the UK. A coma patient, nearly dead, but its dreams were a reflection of global consciousness, like a weather vane. Someone had been using it to predict the stock market. Telepathy requires a higher intensity of consciousness to detect what's happening in someone else's brain, but that's because our own consciousness is so loud. It's like doing astronomy in the middle of the day. But if your own consciousness is dimmed, it'd be easier to detect or be influenced by others. Their subjects aren't being haunted, they're being telepathically linked to someone. 6 days later, the telepath at Site 49, Sarah Ann Manderley, sends a message to Vo telling her that she saw her recent request that she come to the site and speak to some of the infected people. She's afraid she's going to have to say no. She's been to her site before and looked at this SCP, and she'd rather not do it again. She spoke to her manager, and he agreed that she doesn't have to do it. Vo goes through the logs and doesn't find any record of Sarah Ann visiting Site 86, or any Daydream experiments involving a telepath. She'd remember something like that anyways. She then decides to go through Finley's voice memos, finding that Talbot led the visit, and Finley deleted the file afterward. Finley didn't delete the file properly, however, and it was in the long-term backup array. The experiment log is from 8 years ago, with Talbot wanting Sarah Ann to tell them what's causing SCP-9100. At the very least, he needs to know if there's any danger to information security, especially if a senior member of security were to be contaminated. Sarah Ann reads an infected D-class, and says that she can hear her, but she's faint, far away, under a blanket, and the static is so much stronger, it makes her sick. The static is always there, the collective conscious, but with the infected, it's so loud. She motions to Finley and says that he's the same way. She can barely hear him at all, the static is deafening. It's closer somehow, and she can feel its movements, like a riptide. Talbot tells her not to worry about Finley, as he's nowhere near the gestation cutoff. She whispers that it's not that, but she's interrupted as she collapses. Talbot asks her if she thinks someone could be using this entity to monitor them. She doubts it. What they're tuned into isn't a single person, it's every person. But it's impossible to say for sure. That's just how it goes sometimes. You win some, you lose some. Talbot swears and tells Finley to delete the recording. In another voice memo, Vo says that she shouldn't be surprised, but she is. Despite everything, she still believed Talbot was trying to help, in his misguided way. He knew for months that Finley was contaminated, and he buried it. Endangered the entire team to protect his project. Never mind how useful this info would have been to their research. Years wasted. And Finley asking leading questions. He would never make mistakes like that. At least he was too incompetent to delete the file properly. She has a hunch about Sarah Ann, but she needs to know what else they buried, and she's running out of time. She returns to visit Finley, and she begins writing in her notebook as she addresses him. She says that she's found the file he deleted for Talbot, a visit from Sarah Ann Manderley in January of 2017. She needs his input. Finley replies by asking that Marissa Vo needs his advice, and says that kangaroos can't dance. Vo puts a hand to steady herself against a wall, and after a moment she stands and continues. She says that she needs to know what else he learned from her. She knows that SCP-9100 is connected to the collective consciousness, but did he gain any other insights? Finley begins to ramble about the recent excitement and getting back into the test chamber, but Vo interrupts him. He says that he remembers the telepath. After she came, Talbot said that they should drop it and move on. He figures that he had his reasons, and didn't want to rock the boat. Vo sighs and thanks him for now. Finley just says that you win some, you lose some. A day later, Talbot sends a message to Vo, telling her that a mutual friend informed him that she found a file that does not belong to her. Her letters with Finley were not his only social contact in the last 7 years, as they speak often. When he reassigned her this case, he didn't grant her free rein to dig through deleted files beyond her clearance level. Out of respect for their long-standing collaboration, he's chosen not to pursue disciplinary charges for her breach of information security. In return, he trusts that she knows well enough to act with discretion. If he finds that file where it shouldn't be, she will answer. Furthermore, the O4 Council has just approved the use of NAPIG Stage 6 and 7 on Finley. Those procedures are currently underway, and he'll be decontaminated shortly. He's closing her investigation, effective immediately. She has an hour to pack up the files. 5 minutes later, Vo records another voice memo. She says that for Finley's sake, she hopes NAPIG works, but she knows that it won't. She'll have the team pack up the files and prepare it for storage. There are acres of files from this project, some of which she hasn't seen in years. Here's a box from the very start, right after the air crash. She pulls one out she recognizes, an interview with Samantha Morris, an 80-year-old woman. Morris says that it smells like old people here, and everyone is mean. Vo asks what the last thing she remembers is before waking up here. She says that she was with Daddy in the front room, and they were talking about the weather. Vo asks her to try and remember any of the events that happened after that, just before she woke up here. What does she remember about her children, or grandchildren? Morris just says that she wants to go home now, and asks where her mommy is, and why she looks like grandma. Vo excuses herself and ends the interview. In another voice memo, Vo says that she remembers this interview. She remembers ending it. All the interviews that day and that week, just endless stories of suffering and loneliness, were filling something up inside her. She didn't know it was there. She thought she was handling it, until suddenly it was overflowing. She ran to the bathrooms, and when she got to the cubicle, she didn't even lock the door. She just collapsed on the ground and cried so hard she almost threw up. Her hands were shaking, and it felt like nothing would ever be okay again. When she came outside, Finley was there. He didn't give her a hug, or pat her on the shoulder or anything. He was just there, like a rock, something to hold on to. And she knew that as long as he was there, she wasn't going to drown. He stood her up and sent her to counseling. Foundation counseling was nothing like therapy. They were trying to somehow harden her heart, make her okay with everything she was seeing, so she could get back to work, just like Finley. She wanted so badly to be like him. When you're that low, you'd do anything to escape. You want to shut it off, shut yourself off completely. So she listened to him and found ways to survive. She learned she could take notes, or pretend to take notes, so she didn't have to see their faces. It must have worked, because watching this recording all these years later, it's so distant. She barely recognizes herself. But that girl, crying on the bathroom floor, who was willing to do anything, give anything to help those people, she's still in there. The things in her life that she's proudest of, she did because of her. She never wants to lose that part of her. Why did she let them convince her that she should? And what else was Finley wrong about? She decides to review SCP-9100 case files and Finley's personal memos while mitigating the site director's arbitrary time limit by barricading the door to the storage room. She reads the log in which Finley said that he survived things he probably shouldn't have, as well as the report that during decontamination procedures on the Napeag-resistant individuals, they become less responsive over time, in contrast to the awakening typically observed. There's no doubt that Finley and the others are dissociating as a coping mechanism, but how do they reach him now? They kept looking for ideas on how they could hurt him more, and none of it worked. She reads excerpts about Talbot's project Daydream, and remarks that of course Daydream was popular with leadership, as humanity is a chaotic variable. She reads about the phrases that the infected people use, phatic expressions, which convey little semantic value but serve a purpose in building social bonds. It's trying to reach out and form some connection. If the subjects are drowning in the collective consciousness, maybe they're not trying to drag others in with them. Maybe they're reaching for someone to pull them out. She then reads Finley's comments from when she first joined, about how she's phenomenal and how she listens to him. She remarks that she's never heard him speak this way. She has an idea, and it makes perfect sense that this would be the one thing the Foundation never thought to try. An hour later, Talbot went onto the intercom and ordered Vo to report directly to his office. 10 minutes later, he ordered security staff to search her lab and the document storage rooms, but they couldn't locate her. Vo enters Finley's containment chamber hurriedly and closes the door. She stands facing the closed door for a few moments, hands on the doorframe, in an apparent attempt to calm herself. Finley is sitting on the bed, staring at the wall, and does not acknowledge her entrance. Vo throws her notebook onto the table and claps her hands together, loudly shouting, "Right." Finley doesn't react, and she says that they need to talk. She begins to pace back and forth, and says that she's come to realize that he's been wrong about a lot of things. She's been at Site 20 for 7 years, and they talk about wee Rasputin there all the time. He's a hero to them, too. But something stood out, a throwaway comment at lunch about Finley and Talbot either wanting to kill each other or screw each other. Finley just replies that boys will be boys, but Vo says that it was a dumb comment, childish, but it stuck with her. She was digging around in the old files just now, and a few things stood out. He named the procedure for transmitting SCP-9100 Dover, because he wanted to provoke Talbot. He spoke up in the hearing to stop Daydream when he could have submitted objections in writing. He pretends to keep things professional, but he enjoys their childish rivalry as much as Talbot does. Then she found the motion Talbot passed, to keep SCP-9100 here at Site 86 instead of going to major anomalies. Here, with so few resources, where they struggled to solve something so big with so little funding. Site-86's budget is small because it's the Minor Anomalies Unit. It's not supposed to handle things like this. Talbot was trying to turn this site into something it isn't, because he had a personal agenda. But Finley co-signed the motion. He kept it here so he could work on it. He talked about making sure the work gets done right, but she thinks maybe he wanted a way out, just like Talbot. A big case to rescue his career. Get himself the Skoda he always wanted. She realized that they're both stuck in their childish patterns, and neither of them will grow up. Finley hesitantly says, "Many a mickle makes a muckle," a Scottish idiom meaning many littles make a large. She turns to look at him for the first time and approaches. She asks what they did to him, and she pulls the chair up to sit directly in front of him. Finley doesn't react. She says that he told her time and time again that whatever happens, never to let it become personal. She understands why. The Foundation is a cold place. It doesn't want to know about their feelings. They give up everything to work here. It's full of people so detached, so professional, they can think of 1,000 ways to torture him, but they literally cannot imagine how they might actually reach him. He survived 30 years here because he learned to detach. He didn't care what happened to his body, but anyone could see what he was really afraid of. It was in his gruff voice and his rudeness and his constant swearing. She didn't refuse her first transfer because of the work they were doing. She didn't save him from blinding out of academic interest. She didn't write letters for 7 years because she needed his input. When she left, it was because of all those times he said she owed him nothing, to forget about him, that they're just colleagues. She believed him, and he was wrong. She's his friend, and she's tired of pretending otherwise. He inspired her. He made the work fun, even when it was horrifying. In the lab with him, she never doubted herself, or questioned what she was doing with her life. Half of who she is because of him. She'll always be his friend, even when he's an idiot, even when he disappoints her. That hallmark shite is not weakness, it's how they survive. She places her hands on his shoulders, avoiding eye contact by staring at his chest. She says that she knows he's still in there, and he's afraid. She tells him to hold on to her, and she locks eyes with him. Neither moves or blinks for 12 seconds, until Finley blinks first. He looks around the room, then at his hands and the containment uniform he's wearing. Vo releases his shoulders and leans back, breathing heavily. She rubs her eyes. Finley asks, "How long?" and she smiles and says 9 years. He runs his hands through his hair and remarks that she looks old. She replies that he looks terrible. He notices her badge that says Senior Researcher and asks how she's still here at Site-86. She tucks her badge into her lab coat and says that she had some cases to finish up. That's all. He then asks what he missed, and she tells him that he got a commendation for good behavior from Talbot. He swears and says that she should have euthanized him. After a pause, Vo asks if he heard any of what she just said before he woke up. He says that he was running the trigger word test on a subject and couldn't get the poor sod to shut up. Next thing he remembers is being here, with her, so no, he doesn't suppose he heard it. Except, like they all say, it feels like a dream he had. Something important. Maybe he didn't hear it, but maybe he felt it. Vo abruptly moves across the room and hugs him. He stares unmoving for a moment before reciprocating. He pats her on the back until she slowly backs off and sits back down. He asks her if she solved 9100 then, to which she says almost. They've got a lot to catch up on, and she needs his help and his connections, if he still has them. He says that she means if any of the old buggers are still alive. Afterward, scans confirmed that both Vo and Finley were clear of 9100 contamination. Finley was offered comprehensive Foundation counseling, which he accepted. Vo revised the protocol for Napeag to prioritize connection-based guided recovery, with the induction of trauma as a second-line treatment only. 2 weeks later, the O4 Council declined to reinitialize Project Daydream until Vo's novel decontamination method had been studied. Consequently, Talbot permitted Finley and Vo to seek outside assistance in properly mapping the mechanisms of 9100's effect. 2 days later, Finley sent a message to a Latha Velichetti about some machine she has, level 5 stuff. He doesn't need to know what it is, he just needs her to use it, get some brownie points, and be the big hero. He's sending her the SCP file. They've got 2 subjects ready for transfer on her nod. He tells her to take the case or send them findings. 2 months go by, and Vo records a voice memo saying that as frustrating as it was, she understands why Finley didn't want 9100 to go to another team. The Foundation is based on secrets. When they take your project away, whether they solve it or not, you might never find out what the answer was. For a curious mind, that's a terrifying prospect. She's been doing what Finley and Talbot both did, holding on to it, trying to be a hero. Ultimately, though, it's not about them. It's about the people who need their help. And today, Velichetti's team delivered. They've got the full picture. Finally. We're finally given the answer then of what SCP-9100 is. It's a progressively erosive thought pattern which subsumes the consciousness of affected subjects into the global metacognitive aggregate. Vo calls it a prion disease for thoughts. Consciousness is not vital for bodily operations, yet it is fundamental to the brain's nature. A healthy brain lacking consciousness will continually attempt to reinitialize it, for reasons that are currently unknown. Upon contamination with SCP-9100, the subject's loss of awareness is immediate. However, the individual's consciousness slowly falls deeper into the collective over time. As their individuality is subsumed deeper into the aggregate, a process that takes several years, a reflexive action can be observed, caused by the brain's attempt to regain consciousness. This reflex manifests as verbal utterances and attempted eye contact, and can be likened to other automatic actions such as the mammalian diving response, hypnic jerks, or cadaveric movements. At a critical subsumptive depth, these reflexive movements obtain a psychokinetic quality, engaging the nearest conscious individual in a unilateral rescue attempt, with the goal of extricating themselves. Vo likens it to a drowning person grabbing someone's hand to try to pull themselves out. Without mitigating variables, these rescue attempts invariably fail, pulling the recipient individual's thought pattern within the critical margin necessary for subsumption. Even if the rescue attempt fails, the resultant co-antagonistic psychokinetic pull accomplishes a reduction of subsumptive depth, temporarily abating further reflex for 5 to 7 years. This process was previously referred to as a gestation period. The reflex which causes the transmission of 9100 is an inherent quality of a functioning brain. It cannot be suppressed without concomitant cessation of vital function. In other words, they can't stop people spreading 9100 without killing them. Ad hoc research has demonstrated that where the recipient consciousness possesses sufficient unidirectionality and an interpersonal bond to act as psychokinetic reinforcement, the rescue attempt can succeed. In such an instance, both subjects are cleared of 9100 influence. As Vo puts it, it's possible to pull them out if you try hard enough and you actually care. Talbot then changed the status of SCP-9100 to explained closed. A month later, Velichetti's team led a decontamination effort utilizing the revised Napeag methodology, and succeeded in eradicating 9100 in the general public. They received the Special Commendation for Outstanding Dedication and Achievement for their breakthroughs in cognitive science. The O4 Council then approved the reinitialization of Project Daydream. The renewed research focus was to find a solution to the problem of unintended transmission. 3 more months go by, and we get another voice memo from Vogue. She states that Finley has finally retired. He's earned it, as people don't retire here very often. It's hard to believe it's over. The problem she's spent her career trying to solve. They couldn't help the ones who woke, but at least they woke everyone still asleep. Talbot is happy Daydream is moving again, but Velichetti's conclusion was firm. There's no safe way to prevent transmission. Talbot will keep trying anyway, forever. Trapped in his patterns, like all of us. She had time, finally, to pick up threads she noticed earlier, and it confirmed her suspicions. So now she has to decide what to do with it. If she used the formal channels, Talbot would kill it and bury her. But Bakaluba at Site-25 still owes her a favor. In this job, they're often forced to choose between what they want to do and the right thing to do. This time, though, they're one and the same. She knows it will cost her, and she doesn't care. She's through doing what she's told. The difference between her and Finley is that she doesn't need to lie to herself. This is personal. The next day, Bakaluba alerted Site-25 leadership that he had received a dossier via a source he claimed was anonymous. The dossier included an audio recording of Sarah Ann Manderley's visit to Site-86. It also included a comprehensive analysis of Site-49's performance metrics over time, demonstrating that these metrics began to decline immediately after Manderley returned from her Site-86 visit, plateauing at a near-average level which had been maintained consistently since. Site-25 leadership immediately initiated emergency recovery operations. PSG screening revealed that all 848 members of staff at Site-49 had been contaminated by 9100. Decontamination began immediately and was concluded successfully 3 weeks later. Operation Clean Sweep was then undertaken to screen all Foundation staff members globally. This initiative surfaced 2,871 additional cases of 9100 and cost $890 million. The rapid spread of 9100 through the Foundation was traced to the movements of Sarah Ann, whose telepathic abilities effectively broadcasted its effect to all nearby personnel. The global reduction in performance standards caused by the 2,871 contaminated staff members were deemed responsible for at least 18 other containment breaches, resulting in 138 deaths and approximately $1.9 billion in losses. In response to the 9100 crisis, the O5 Council ordered a comprehensive A12 audit to evaluate the case history of SCP-9100, Project Daydream, and operational practices at Site-86. Per recommendation of Site-86 Director Talbot, and in light of her years of stalwart service, Marissa Vo has been reassigned to the Archival Division Outpost in Nebraska. Alright, a largely happy ending then. Let's recap. Finley at the Minor Anomalies Unit gets assigned a new minor anomaly out of Ohio, some sort of mental anomaly that causes people to get caught in a perpetual daydream until some sort of massive trauma seems to knock them out of it. They wake up far, far older than they thought they were, with very little memory of the intervening years. In the interim, they just coast through life, being utterly average humans in every way, and avoiding rocking the boat at all. Finley gets assigned Dr. Vo by the Site Director Talbot, instead of the full team he asked for, presumably because of a grudge that Talbot and Finley share for each other. The research goes through a few ups and downs, without them really figuring out what 9100 is or what causes it, until Finley gets infected. Vo can't solve it, and the Foundation can't seem to wake him up because of his natural resistance. This also puts a wrench in Talbot's proposed Project Daydream, an initiative that would involve purposefully infecting Foundation employees with 9100 to make them model employees. The higher-ups are pretty excited by the potential, but wary that the data seems to show that the only way they could get knocked out of it if they get infected is through intensive anomalous torture. Vo eventually accepts a transfer to another department, leaving Finley behind for years, until she learns that Finley is going to be amnesticized and released. She returns to the Minor Anomalies unit, and Talbot gives her 1 month to solve it. She uncovers a recording showing that Talbot had known that Finley was infected before it became public knowledge, but he buried it in an attempt to protect his Project Daydream. Also, he got a telepath infected, and told no one about that possibility either. In the last moments, Vo realizes that the one thing that could work to free someone is exactly the one thing that the cold, clinical Foundation would never really attempt. She reaches out to Finley with care and compassion and rescues him. In the end, Finley retires. The other team that managed to map all this out wins a SCOTA award, and Project Daydream is set to move forward, with the intent of finding a way to prevent unintended transmission. Vo sabotages all of that very decisively by leaking the recording of the telepath, along with data showing that she's infected. The subsequent analysis of all the damage caused by her becoming infected adds up to a bill of over $2.5 billion. As thanks, Talbot ships Vo off to an archival outpost in Nebraska. It's a very interesting article, not necessarily because of the anomaly itself, but because it shows a good look at the people operating within the Foundation, both their foibles and their virtues. There are people like Talbot in the Foundation, where it's a career in which they care about the power and prestige more than the work itself. And there are people like Vo, that want to help people but have to navigate the treacherous waters of bureaucracy and interoffice politics to do so. Sure, maybe the ending is a bit sappy, as Finley was saved through the power of friendship, but a little sappiness never hurt anyone. In the end, perhaps it was a relatively minor anomaly, but, as they say, perhaps the real anomaly was the friends we made along the way.